Welcome back to another episode of the Bleed Lows podcast, the live edition of the show as we are celebrating the Dodgers clinching the National League pennant for the second straight year, and they are heading back to the World Series to defend their title. Before we get into today's episode, definitely want to shout out DodgersBeat.com. That's where you can find all of our writing for pregame, postgame interviews, opinions, analysis pieces, and much, much more. Never miss a beat. Go to DodgersBeat.com. And Vince, you're joining us yet again for a very celebratory episode. I think it went a little bit faster than a lot of us, predicted that this series was going to go. However, I think you kind of had a similar idea with me with Dodgers in 5 or around that frame. They ended up doing it a game earlier, sweeping the series in dominant fashion, and clearly they were the best team in the National League this year, despite how they played throughout the regular season. Before we get into all the Ohtani talk, all that stuff, what were your takeaways of just this series for the Brewers' perspective? Because it just felt like it was a complete mismatch from the start of game 1 with the starters from Blake Snell, Yamamoto. But what did you see from the Brew Crew in this series?
Well, we didn't see much. We didn't see much offensively from them. We saw a lot of Ashby and Koenig and McGill and anybody else in their bullpen, Uribe. It was one of those where they got behind. They didn't win game 2, which was their best shot with their best guy that could give them some length. And I think they got maybe a little too cute for themselves, trying to play the matchups and all the other things. And or maybe they didn't, because the one time they didn't use the opener other than Peralta, Ohtani started the game with the whole red. So, but yeah, I mean, I know they had some injuries, and I know, the payroll discrepancies, everybody talk about all that and everything else, but the Dodgers, they finally have given us the confidence when we can just be like, oh, the Dodgers are going to do this. They're going to get this.
Yeah, I think my main takeaway from this series is I think the Brewers just kind of either overmanaged or thought the series entirely. I knew that they had, pitching issues. You lose Brandon Woodruff right before the postseason starts. A lot of their starters like Mizorowski, Priester, and they were making the most starts they've ever made in their career, innings limits, all that stuff. So they kind of went with pitching chaos, and that can only get you so far. And they got to the NLCS. They win the NL Division Series against the Cubs, a division rival of their own. But they had to do it in 5 games, and then they run into a Dodgers team that we just been talking about this has been clicking on all cylinders, starting rotation. The offense has been getting key hits. Today was the first day I thought that they showed, the most power, and Ohtani ended up doing 3 of those with the home runs that he hit today. Since probably the wild card series when they outslugged the Reds and scored, almost double-digit runs in back-to-back games. So I just think, going from Pat Murphy's comments leading up to this series and then during this series, and he even started trying to backtrack those comments, or kind of the perception of being the underdog, just because it looks really, I think it looked like a bad look. Because imagine, you hear your manager saying that, even though he probably is telling his players behind the scenes, no, this is all for show. Like, you guys are good. We're here for a reason. But then you get swept in the championship series, and it just wasn't really close, except for maybe that first game, where the score was just a 1-run difference. I don't know. It just felt like the Dodgers were miles better. And like you said, the talk of the league and social media, I'm sure it's going to continue now. Payroll discrepancies, talent discrepancies. The Dodgers are ruining baseball. I know you spoke on it last time you were on here, where you don't really think it's that much of a difference, because, a lot of these other teams do have the ability to spend, even teams like the Milwaukee Brewers, where they're not putting that much revenue into their payroll. And then, the Dodgers were beatable in a lot of assets this season, and they just ended up locking in at the right time. But, to say it's an issue, I just feel like it's an ignorant statement to the Dodgers themselves. And Andrew Freeman even spoke before the game, kind of saying that, pretty much that sentiment as well. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, and I think people take it when you say, oh, every team can spend more, and every team spend like the Dodgers? No, but that's not what we're necessarily saying. You look at just this past offseason with, even though it didn't work out and these guys haven't even been a factor, like Kirby Yates, Tanner Scott, Blake Snell. Well, Blake Snell has been a factor, but you look at those three. Could another team have signed all three of those guys? Maybe not. But could three different teams have signed each of those guys and spread out the talent? Yeah. And then the Dodgers don't have any of those guys. It's not a matter of team spending, all this money to compete. It's about adding parts here and there to compete. A guy like Kike Hernandez who sits until February, almost a couple years in a row, and then ends up back with the Dodgers. A guy that performs in the postseason, maybe not so much in the regular season, but that's just what it is with this. Is we know as Dodger fans, we have the payroll's there, the money's there. It's a lot different than some of these other teams. Some of these other teams also aren't spending to their capability, but it's not about every team spending. It's about, or not every team spending big. It's just about every team spending. If every team picks up one extra player that the Dodgers have picked up in the last 2-3 off seasons, the Dodgers aren't where they're at. We might not be talking right now about another World Series berth.
Yeah, and that's my, thoughts on this entire thing as well. And there's a lot of reasons that you can dive in on another day of why the Dodgers were able to, I guess, take advantage of cheap owners that don't want to spend money. I think the biggest thing that happened over the last 3 years has been the TV rights issues with a lot of these, teams losing their streaming services or their wired cable services that have been giving them, a lot of money over the last couple of years, and we're starting to see cord cutting and all that throughout the league. And that's why I feel like Rob Manfred, we've seen they're making a push to try to do more with MLB TV and making everything a product of Major League Baseball, similar with the NFL's doing with, the NFL package on YouTube, stuff like that. It's going to take a while for that to kind of go into effect in baseball, I think, especially when you got a team like the Dodgers that benefits so well off of their TV deal that goes into effect. I think that thing doesn't even expire until like 2030 or something after that. So they're loaded from that TV deal, and for good reason. The Dodgers, they play in Los Angeles, one of the biggest markets in the sport. The other thing we're going to look forward to before we start diving into this game, the lockout possibly being in 2027 is definitely going to affect this year's free agency and the following year's free agency, because a lot of these smaller market margin teams, they're probably not going to want to get their books locked up for the 2027 season with the onset of possibly missing multiple games, maybe half the season, maybe the entire season. That's hundreds of millions of dollars that could be out of those owners' pockets. Teams like the Dodgers, Yankees, Mets, they can recoup those losses, just like how the Dodgers recouped all their losses of the $700 million that they are eventually going to give Ohtani in probably the first season of him playing there. But that's just something to look forward into the future. I feel like the Dodgers, whether they win this World Series or don't win this World Series, they're going to be heavily active in the free agent market, trade market this offseason as well. So I don't know about you, Vince. I'm ready to just continue breaking baseball. I mentioned to our crew behind the scenes here, if, the Dodgers have to three-peat to, have a lockout in the sport, I mean, so be it.
Hey, that's what it comes down to. Then that's what it is. I think perfect transition here as I have the TV on in the background. Shohei Ohtani just named NLCS MVP. Then we can get into the game. Shohei Ohtani, what he did on one side of the ball could have maybe got him the MVP just because there wasn't really a standout candidate. But luckily for him, he does things on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, that's a great segue here. Going straight to Ohtani. I thought leading up to this game, he wasn't doing much at the plate since game 1 of the wild card series, all the way back at the beginning, not even October. It was at the late of September when that series was taking place. Didn't really do much in the division series. Even his pitching outing gave up 3 runs, but still gave them a nice quality start in his first start of the postseason. You fast forward to now until pretty much yesterday, the bat hasn't really been a factor for the Dodgers, yet they were still able to go, 9-1 this postseason without it. Today, he finally wakes up with the bat and he's on the mound, tosses 6 great innings, doesn't allow a run, gets 10 strikeouts, and to boot, he hits 3 home runs today, and they weren't, just cheap shots. They were, leaving stadium shots. Overall, I was saying, he's probably going to pitch or play his best game today, just because I feel like his entire career has been leading up to this moment. This is a guy that signed with the Dodgers, not because they offered him $700 million, but because he gives them the best chance to do what he always wants to do as a competitor, and that's to win. And now he had the chance to pitch and hit his team to clinch a World Series appearance. I feel like that was a top to-do list on his bucket list, and he ended up doing that in the most great way possible. Overall, is this one of the best performances we've not ever seen, not just in the postseason, but just MLB history in general, just because of what he's done on both sides of the ball?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to argue that Reggie Jackson has been Mr. October forever, and that was 3 home runs. Ohtani did that and also pitched 6 innings and struck out 10. Like, obviously, we hadn't seen him pitch. Well, we didn't get to see him pitch last year. We saw him pitch in the DS. He did very well, but, didn't hit that series. And coming into today, I knew he was going to pitch well. I knew he was going to give him 6 or 7, rack up the strikeouts, which ultimately probably hurt his pitch count a little bit. But offensively, I thought he would do at least one thing, especially with Quintana starting. Quintana's not a nasty lefty. He's not a hard-throwing lefty. He's, a crafty lefty, but Ohtani can hit crafty. And we saw that early on with that first home run. And, yeah, I mean, I think there was a few posts of the Baseball Savant page, and Shohei Ohtani had the highest exit velos, the highest distance, the highest pitch velocity, and the most swings and misses. Like, we're kind of, I don't want to say we're used to it as Dodger fans because we only saw him pitch a handful of times so far this year, but I don't think there's anything he could do that would surprise me anymore.
Yeah, I just think today we got the full two-way experience, like, ad nauseum. We saw him do it on the biggest stage in October with a clincher on the line. He pitches probably one of his best outings in a Dodger uniform, gets his first 10 strikeout game as a Dodger, and it comes in the postseason. He gave Dave Roberts everything he needed and more, because with Sasaki being the 9th inning guy, and then, you have your starting pitchers going deep into the games, whether it's 6, 7, 8, or full 9 innings, Dave Roberts now has a lane to kind of go to who he wants to with the bullpen, which makes things a lot easier. I know a lot of analytical people will tell you, no, it can be anybody in the 9th inning. And the Dodgers kind of had that rotating closer role for the last, several years since Kenley Jansen left. But I feel like it did make an impact, this October, once they said, you know what, Sasaki's our guy for the 9th or late innings, and we'll work backwards from there. And then, Ohtani giving them the 6 quality innings today, but just setting the tone with the leadoff home run, that has actually never been done before. I was wondering if he ever did pitch a game and then lead it off with a home run as well. But, he hasn't really let off much until his time with the Dodgers. I feel like Joe Madden did it a little bit when he was the manager of the Angels, but he was usually always in the 2 or 3 hole with Anaheim before coming to the Dodgers, and then Mookie Betts goes down with his injury, and then he pretty much took away with it. But to strike out, you give up the leadoff walk, and then you strike out the next 3 hitters, 100-mile-per-hour pitches, splitters working, the curveballs working, and then hit a mammoth home run to set the tone. That's when I tweeted out the video. I was like, this NLCS is over. I was like, once he hit that home run, it pretty much set the tone. And coincidentally, this time last year, he also hit a leadoff home run off of Jose Quintana. So, I mean, deja vu is all over the place here, but I just felt like this was Ohtani's game to set the tone. And I think Alden Gonzalez mentioned on ESPN today when I was watching it while I was at work, and he said that Ohtani, with his meeting the other day when they kept questioning him about being a two-way player and about if it was affecting his hitting, he kind of was getting a little hostile there. And I feel like he came today with a purpose, and he definitely showed it today.
Yeah, I mean, you knew he was serious about getting the offense right when he took on-field batting practice. Obviously, that became maybe a little bit bigger thing than it needed to be, but anything with Ohtani is going to be bigger than it needs to be. And, ironically enough, he hits one out of the stadium, and everyone goes crazy, but they're like, oh, it's just batting practice. And then he's like, oh, it was just batting practice. Well, here's one in the game for you that goes out of the stadium. So, yeah, it for him, even last year, like, people, there's always stuff on Twitter, and that last year, this year, I think his combined batting average was under 200 in the postseason. Last year, obviously the World Series, he was more of a decoy than anything else. He didn't really have much with arm injury, but he's come through, and a lot of his hits, even if there hasn't been as many as we would want, have been impactful. Last year, that 3-run homer against the Padres, got them right back in the game when it was like, oh man, here we go again. Like the Dodgers are going to lose here to the Padres. He got them back in it. One of his hits in the DS, one of his few hits in the DS, or maybe the only one, was the one a difference maker, because it was the run that ended up they won by 1 run. He drove in a run the other night. It didn't ultimately prove to be the game winner, but still an extra run that they had on the board. And then today he just said, you know what, don't worry about it, I got this. And a little bit of a microcosm of his season, that obviously the leadoff homer is different, but the other 2 times he comes up to bat, a lot of solo home runs this year for Shohei Ohtani. But hey, we'll take it.
Yeah, he's on his way to winning his 4th MVP award, 3rd straight season, 2nd straight with the Dodgers uniform. As long as he continues to hit the way he's hitting and pitch the way he can pitch, as long as he remains in that 2-way player role, I think I think the way Major League Baseball voters and the writers vote, I don't really think they get Ohtani fatigue as much as the rest of the media or maybe some fans may get. You'll never see them make excuses. Well, LeBron won last year, so we kind of got to give it to somebody else this year. I think baseball doesn't really work like that, where they will give the MVP to the same guy multiple years in a row, as long as they earn it or one up it. And I feel like Ohtani is just only getting better, like fine wine with age. It seems like he gets more and more, confident as a pitcher or confident as a batter. He's never put up these types of numbers when he was with the Angels. It feels like we're really getting true prime Ohtani right now. But to kind of go back to your point earlier, there was really nobody standing out in this series. And I think that goes to just how well they played as a team throughout this entire postseason run. Like, they didn't really outslug anybody. They didn't really, they obviously, the pitchers and the bullpen, they locked it down when they needed to, but there was really no standout performers on offense, besides the starting, pitchers between Blake Snell and Yamamoto and Tyler Glass. Now, it was very much a team collective effort. We were talking before the game and I was like, man, before Ohtani went off and decided to hit 3 home runs and pitch 6 scoreless innings, I was like, maybe Tommy Edman wins this, this MVP again. He's hitting almost 400 in this series alone. Will Smith, I think, was 6 for 13 this series as well. I heard at one point. So it's like there was a couple guys that could have been in the running for the award. And I think that goes to speak for just how the Dodgers this year played as a complete unit. Defense was awesome. The bullpen was clutch when they needed to be, besides for like a game where they kind of had to punt in the division series. And then you look at this series, this is the first time the Dodgers have ever swept a best-of-7 series. They got close in 2017, and that 2017 team was really good as well. So, I mean, how good is this team to kind of play for each other and do it in a way we haven't really seen them do it all season? They really played Brewers baseball. They had key hits. They made the most of their singles. They took the extra base. They were aggressive. We saw Justin Dean get a stolen base in that final inning as well, but they just played a different brand of baseball so far. And I feel like it's just been helping them overall play more as a team than being like individual, like a lot of other postseason players get lost in.
Yeah, I mean, Alec Bohm kind of talked about it in the last series, and we've seen it from the Dodgers, and they've talked about pass the baton's kind of been the buzz phrase. And during the regular season, when the offense was struggling, it was Mookie was trying to do too much, and he admitted it. Ohtani was pretty good. He's always going to have some highs and lows, but pretty good throughout the year. Freddie's pretty steady, but he would hit some lows, and it just seemed like guys were trying to do too much with their at bat instead of just drawing a walk or taking some pitches or hitting a single, whatever it was. And now that's kind of where the offense is right now. Like, Ohtani hadn't really done much, Mookie hadn't really done much, and the other guys were getting it done. And with this Dodgers team, once you get to a certain point, like, they already know that individual stats don't matter. Like, you could have the whole team hitting 200, but one guy had a key hit that drove in a couple runs in one game. One guy had a key home run that drove in a few runs another game. That's where the Dodgers beat you with, the lineup, because, even Andy Pages, who has been pretty bad throughout the entire postseason, had a big one in game 2 with that double down the line that scored a run. And, you maybe aren't expecting that from him. Kevin Kike, who's had a lot of hits this postseason, some impactful, some not so much, but, he's still the guy out there. Tommy Edman, continue to drive in runs when he can. And yeah, if Ohtani hadn't hit 3 home runs, I think Edman would have led the team in RBI. He would have had for sure a stake at the table for NLCS MVP. But yeah, this team it feels weird to be confident as a Dodger fan in October just because of what we've gone through, in the past. But this team makes you feel like they're going to get it done, even when the bullpen's a little shaky. But I feel like offensively, like these guys can lock down when they need to. I mean, Mizorowski, as soon as he faltered, they jumped on him yesterday. And it's, you never know who's going to do it, but it's going to get done.
And that's something I've been mentioning, throughout this past especially this postseason run where we've been hurt so many times, leading up to the last 2 seasons. Because even 2020, it was finally getting the monkey off the back, but we still, heard our fair share of criticism and jokes from opposing, fan bases across the league. Shortened season, Mickey Mouse ring, all that types of stuff, and they finally do it again. They win it in a full season last year, and now they're in prime position to go back to back. But one of the big reasons for that, and we'll kind of get retrospective on this right now, especially as we get ready for the World Series, they're starting pitching. It's just been something that I have never really thought I would see anymore. Starters allowed to be starters, go deep into games, pitch, it feels like I feel like I'm playing MLB The Show when I'm watching these games, and I'm playing it on rookie difficulty, and I'm just throwing the starters out there. And Dave Roberts hasn't really had to do much managing. He just sends those guys out there. They give him 6-7 innings, maybe even more. And then he goes to the same 2 or 3 bullpen arms when he needs them. And, credit to them, credit to Andrew Freeman. He saw what happened last year. And I mentioned that as when they signed Blake Snell, I was like, Freeman said he does not want to do bullpen games again. He does not want to go through the hectic hoops that the Dodgers had to go through last, postseason. For them to even win the World Series last year with 2.5 starters and a bullpen, that had to go at least 2 or 3 games during, a best of 7 series. I mean, they won the World Series with a de facto bullpen game because Jack Flaherty couldn't get the job done in the first 2 innings. So to not want to have that happen again, they signed Blake Snell. Tyler Glass now comes back. He's healthy. Yamamoto takes a great second-year step in this season, throws that complete game against the Brewers. And, now we have Ohtani, the 2-way star, back. And then you got the guys in the bullpen that got, bumped out of the rotation, and Kershaw and Sheehan. Do we expect this starting rotation to continue this in the World Series? Because I just feel like now they have a week off. The World Series starts on Friday. They get to reset their rotation again. They have the opportunity. Seattle won today. They're up 3-2 in their series. If Seattle ends up going to the World Series, Dodgers will have home field advantage. So I feel like the Dodgers have a lot of advantages right now. I know a lot of people may be scared of having, 5-6 days off, but I just feel like that's going to benefit this team even more.
Yeah, it's not like the offense is a juggernaut right now to where 5 days off is going to cause them any harm. But yeah, for the pitching, obviously it's great. You reset your rotation in a sense, which realistically they're just going to go with the same rotation and have it on over a week rest for Snell when he gets in there. But yeah, I've been watching a lot of the rest of the games of the postseason, and I'm like, man, it sucks when you have to take your starter out in the 3rd inning or the 5th inning, or I mean, even on the Brewers side, you have to have an opener and bulk guys and all this stuff, and we haven't had that for the Dodgers. Yamamoto's had the shortest start, and that was more so because of ineffectiveness than anything else. Everyone else has been rolling, and this is what you thought it could be, and you weren't sure if it would, especially with the injuries. And we're not entirely sure that the Dodgers didn't slow play some of those injuries to make sure the guys are ready to go for now. But if you can do it, more power to you. If it just happened to work out the way, good. But yeah, with Snell and Yamamoto and Glasnow and Ohtani, and the way the offenses have looked against, not as good starting pitching in the ALCS so far, it's really hard to see the Dodgers not, winning again, and doing it because of the starting pitching. They could be some close games where the offense doesn't score and it gets into a bullpen game and some weird things happen. But it's not going to be because of the starting pitching.
Yeah, and going against what you or going with what you said, we look at the Mariners today. They pulled their starting pitcher with like 56 pitches, and I get that he was kind of going. He started game one of their series on short rest, and then he only gets regular rest coming into this game. So they were very aggressive in making sure to pull him because they didn't want the game to get out of hand. They ended up allowing the tying run to score anyway with the relief pitcher that came in. Luckily for the Seattle Mariners offense, they woke up and ended up, scoring a bunch of runs, capped off by Eugenio Suarez grand slam to send it back to Toronto up in the series. But, the other part of this is the Dodgers' biggest weakness heading into October was the bullpen. And I got to tell you, besides Blake Trinan looking a little shaky right now, pretty confident for the guys that have been getting bullpen work. Anthony Bandos looked really good. Alex Vesia, he's getting the job done, got bailed out by a clutch, Mookie Betts double play unassisted there. And then, you know, everybody else is kind of falling in line. Sasaki knows his role. Trinan, besides today looking a little shaky, he's looked good in his most recent outings. And then even Emmett Sheehan hasn't really been used as much as we thought he was going to be used. I got to tell you, are you worried about the Dodgers bullpen at all, even heading into the World Series? Because I just feel like it's in the back of your head, but it's kind of not as high on my list as it was entering, October.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot different than when it was going into the postseason. Maybe I have more trust or have different thoughts than Dave Roberts. I think Jack Dreyer's pretty decent. I think, Bonds should have been used more. I think some of these other guys should have been used in some of these situations and realistically would have had success. I think he's gone to the same well a lot of times. It didn't really hurt them this series because they only played 4 games. One of those games, the guy pitched 9 innings. The other game, the guy pitched 8 innings. So it wasn't an overexposure thing. But I do think, if you do get into a series that goes a little bit longer, then you're going to have to use some of these other guys. And maybe not using them, in this round could maybe, affect that. But they're also getting 5 days off. So, realistically, even if they have pitching this, they're still going to have 5 days off. But, yeah, the bullpen, I'm not going to say it's not a concern. I do think Dave Roberts goes to the Blake Trinan well a little too much for my taste. But, he got the job done essentially. And in the big moments, he got the big strikeout when they needed it in game 1 of this series. And maybe they just need to bring him in when there's runners on base. That seems to be where he's more comfortable. When he gets a clean inning to his own, he usually doesn't finish that inning, it feels like.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that isn't as big as a problem as I thought it was going to be. And clearly that's credit to Dave Roberts for going to the guys that he's trusted, even though, I agree with you. There was a little bit too much Blake Trinan in the last 2 rounds than we were supposedly accustomed to. But it ended up not biting the Dodgers in the ass in the end, and that's all that matters. But I agree with you. Jack Dreyer, Anthony Banda has been good since the second half. He's looked good today. He looked good this series. I think the Dodgers benefited well just not using too many of their arms, not revealing too much. I mean, hell, they didn't even use Clayton Kershaw this series. He's only made 1 appearance. Emmett Sheehan hasn't really been used that much either, and I thought he was going to be a guy that they were using almost every day. And even Roki Sasaki, he pitched back-to-back days today. So that's another checkbox that you can say, all right, now he can do that in the World Series where we're definitely going to need him. And at that point, who cares about, the workload and managing him there? You're just there to get 4 wins as fast as you can. And if he needs to pitch back-to-back days, hell, maybe even the 3rd day in a row in the middle of that set, if they end up having to play 3 in a row, whether it's at home or on the road, that could be an option there too, especially if they need to close it out. But I think the bullpen's kind of figured itself out. The offense, they scored 5 runs today, 3 of them courtesy of, solo shots from Ohtani. I still think they squandered a lot of opportunities. And Dave Roberts even spoke to it yesterday. He said, I'm challenging the offense to kind of pick it up with, these moments with runners in scoring position. And we saw them kind of fall into some recent trends of just not getting those hits or advancing the runners. There was 1 inning where they had, back-to-back singles and they had runners at the corners and they ended up not scoring that inning at all, making it a lot closer to my liking. So I think if anything that's kind of concerning for the Dodgers, it would be that. And they still scored 5 runs. The offense has done just enough. And I have the utmost confidence that the starting pitching, especially whenever they line it up, to be just as good as what they've been doing the rest of October. So I think they're in prime position to repeat as champions. It's a matter of fact of who they're going to be playing. So I'll pivot to you to this. You got the Blue Jays, they're going back to Toronto. You got the Mariners, they're looking for their first World Series appearance in franchise history. I mean, what's the outcome? What are you hoping from the rest of that series? Do you hope it goes the distance, 7 games, and you don't care who they're facing? Do you have a preference? Do you kind of see it one way or the other? What are your thoughts there?
Personal preference, it'd be cool to see the Mariners go. Growing up a Griffey fan, and the Mariners, like that Mariners team of the '90s was so fun with like Edgar and Buhner and Griffey and A-Rod and Randy Johnson. So it'd be cool to see them go. It would hurt to have to hurt all those fans because the Dodgers would win again. But going 6 or 7, I don't think has a huge impact just because Game 7 would be Monday for them. The series starts Friday. If you started, like, Gausman's their number 1, so he might pitch in Game 7 out of relief, but then he still would probably be able to start a Game 1 or even a Game 2. So that part doesn't really matter. I think matchup wise, the Mariners offense, while it has been improved, hasn't really shown itself. Like, they struggled again to score a lot in the Tigers. They struggled to score the last couple games before that big grand slam today. But they do have a lot of like big home run power bats, where the Blue Jays are kind of similar to what the Brewers were supposed to be in terms of they don't strike out a lot and they can beat you some different ways. But honestly, I don't think it matters in the sense of I'm worried about this team. I'm not legitimately worried about any of the teams because I think the Dodgers have enough.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I don't care who they face. I would preferably not want for them to travel between, Canada and the US and cause any hiccups there. Also just pro America, we don't want, the Canadian team getting in there. I just think it would be really cool to see Seattle kind of break through finally, get a World Series appearance. And then, honestly, whatever happens. I just hope it's a really good series between the two clubs. But I just feel like that's going into October, I was like, man, these two teams, like, that would be a nice matchup. Like, I was either going, LA versus Seattle or LA versus Boston, just because I like the vibe of both of those American League teams. But I feel like the Mariners would probably give the Dodgers a little bit more trouble, just because I feel like they actually have a rotation. They have a decent bullpen. They got a lockdown closer in the 9th inning, an all-star who's having career year. And they got some offensive guys that can, like you said, they have power. They're very similar to the Dodgers in a lot of way, or maybe like the Phillies, where they have the power bats, not really good with situational hitting, but they got pitching. And that could be something that the Dodgers could be challenged by, where the Blue Jays, I agree with you, they are very similar to the Mariners. However, they do have, the Vlad Jr. in the middle of the lineup that does have the power, where the Brewers in this instance didn't really have anybody with power in their lineup at all. And we kind of saw that, to win in October, you got to slug, and the Dodgers slugged today. The Brewers didn't really slug at all in their entire postseason run. I think they had like the worst OPS and slugging percentage out of all the teams that entered the postseason. And, that's counting the teams that were also eliminated in the wild card or in the division series. So not good for them. But I think the Dodgers are hot right now. I don't think it matters who they face, because I think the pitching is they're going to be lined up the way they want it to go. Do you see the Dodgers rotation, being switched around? Do they go Ohtani Game 2, or do you think it's always going to be Snell, Yamamoto, Glasnow, and kind of getting Ohtani that extra rest?
Yeah, I think they just want if you're building out a 7-game series and you expect the series to go 7, you want to build it out that way, then you kind of have to go the way they did just because of the days off, But again, if they could always say, oh, well, now that we're in the World Series, Ohtani, you could go on 5 days rest instead of 6+ days rest, and maybe they do switch it around. But honestly, the way Glasnow's looked, he did his thing both times out, and if pitching, notwithstanding Game 4, does affect Ohtani's hitting a little bit, maybe you do want that focus there, but. Yeah, I don't think there's a reason to change if you're building out for a 7-game series. You got Snell 1-5, Yamamoto 2-6, Glasnow 3-7, and Ohtani 4.
Yeah, I would keep it the same. I like going with Snell game one. I mean, I just feel like in a staff full of aces, I think this October he's really shined the brightest, where he has shown that there's a reason he has 2 Cy Young awards under his pocket. And you got to ride the hot hand. You got to have him set up to start the most games in a best of 7 series. So he would get 2 starts and could possibly be available out of the bullpen in a game 7 if needed. Pretty much everybody would, but Snell being, a secret weapon in that game, I think would be preferable for the Dodgers and Dave Roberts. And then Yamamoto, we've seen what he did, complete game, 1 run, effort. That's awesome. You hope he translate that to the World Series as well, like he did last year. And then Glass now, I mean, this is a guy that was doubted a lot. I feel like you can put those doubts to bed now. He seems locked in. All of his pitches are working and, gives the Dodgers 6 solid innings yesterday, does it in the division series against the Phillies as well. So loving what I'm seeing there. And I feel like Ohtani being kind of your 4th starter, it's like, all right, if you get to a 2-1 series lead, or hell, maybe they get to a 3-0 series lead, then you got to face Ohtani in game 4. I mean, that just seems like an overwhelming amount of pressure put up against the other team. Before we close it out here, though, I mean, a couple notes. They're the first team that won the World Series to get back to the World Series since the 2009 Phillies, who won in 2008. They also are the first team, if they win, would be the first back-to-back champions in 25 years. So the Dodgers have a lot of legacy going on right now. If they win, do you consider this era of the 2020s a dynasty?
Yeah, of the 2020 specifically, you have to, like, that'll be 3 and 6 seasons. You go back a little bit further. This is the 5th NL pennant in the last 9 seasons. But if you win this one, because, and I'm sure there'll be Giants fans saying, well, we won 3 and 5 seasons, and they were all, whatever they want to say. But they missed the postseason in between those seasons. Like, it wasn't like a dynasty. It was a few of those guys that were part of it, but I wouldn't necessarily, call it a dynasty. This would be a little bit different just because, they were in the postseason all those other years, and they were, winning 100+ games all those other years. And, they did do the back-to-back, especially in like today's game, our back-to-back hasn't happened, like you said, in 25 years. So, and just the way they're doing it, like if they can finish this 13-1, 13-2, like that'll just add to that legacy a little bit. And yeah, it's this a 3 in a decade solidifies a dynasty, and they would still have a few more seasons left in this decade to kind of add to that.
Yeah, I feel like, even if they win the World Series, it's not over. This run, look, they just finished with the number 1 ranked farm system this year to end MLB Pipeline's rankings. They have so much talent that's coming up through the system. They have so much money. You can implement a salary cap, and I still trust Andrew Freeman and the organization to find loopholes and ways to kind of be creative to still bring in talent. Because at the end of the day, it's up to the player to say, you know what, I want to play for that team because they're a winner, and I'm going to be in a great environment. I'm going to have a chance to build my legacy, and I'm still going to get paid regardless. Because truthfully, I don't think a salary cap's ever going to come. They'll find different ways to do it, whether it's the players get more revenue or of the sharing, all that stuff, or, probably more than likely, like conversations for the offseason, they'll probably just institute more penalties for the teams that exceed the CBT. And then the Dodgers will be like, okay, we'll give up 3 draft picks instead of just 1. We'll do that if it means that we can still spend money at an elite clip and bring in as much talent as we can, because your teams won't. We're already starting to see some of this contract discrepancies with the Skubal and Tigers situation, where it was reported that like $250 million difference. Just give him the $350-400 million contract he wants. If not, looks like he's going to get traded. But I mean, that's a conversation for the offseason. But yeah, we'll get ready to end it here. I'll ask you one final note. What do the Dodgers have to do to win the World Series?
Do what they've been doing. Blake Snell continue to throw strikes. Yamamoto continue to do what he's doing. Tyler Glasnow continue to throw strikes. Ohtani keep doing what he's doing. I would like to see a little bit more on the offensive side, just in terms of they're still getting a lot of opportunities. I mean, even today, 8 times with runners in scoring position, just 1 hit. 5 runs. They've put up at least 5 runs in a lot of these games, even if it they've left, maybe 5 runs in a lot of these games also on the board. But I mean, it's just do what they've been doing, like continue to play this way and realize, and I think they do that, like, it's not over yet. They haven't won it yet. And even if they would be favored again in the next series, you still got to play that series. And, that the Brewers, maybe too much of an overmatch, in terms of the talent and everything else, especially with their injuries. And, some of those guys maybe running out of gas. The next one maybe wouldn't be as much of a talent mismatch. And you're going to have two teams one team that hasn't, won in forever and one team that's never even made it. So, the hunger is a little different on that end. So, but, the Dodgers seem to have locked in and figured out October baseball, at least for the time being.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think they just got to keep doing what they're doing. This postseason run lives and dies by the starting pitching. If they can continue to put up the numbers that they have done in the first 3 rounds of this postseason, it's a wrap. I mean, nobody can match them pitch for pitch with this rotation. There's a reason why these guys are getting paid millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. Blake Snell, Yamamoto, Tyler Glasnow, and Ohtani. That is a formidable opponent for any ball club, especially the Brewers. It looked like they were definitely outmatched. I don't really see these 2 American League teams that are left either and say, you know what, they could give that rotation a little bit of fits. I'm sure it's not going to be as easy as it was to sweep this series here, but we'll see what happens. I mean, the Dodgers are on a roll right now. I could definitely see them maybe only losing like 1 more game. I would be shocked if they lost the World Series with the way they're playing right now. So I think we got to keep our heads high, but it is baseball. Anything can happen. That's the beauty and the curse of this sport. But Dodgers, they're going back to the World Series. You said it, 5th NL pennant in like 9 seasons. I mean, this is just the golden era of Dodgers baseball that us fans have been waiting for a long time. And, we're going to make the most of it. All the other fan bases can say that we're ruining baseball, this, and that. But at the end of the day, all we care about and all that organization cares about is how we feel and putting a winning product on the field. Any other closing thoughts before we get out of here? You're muted.
Oh, muted. Time for a new hat, new patch. World Series patch for sure. Hopefully, World Series champion patch, a gold hat next year, all that good stuff, everything else that comes with it. But yeah, I mean, like I said, golden age of Dodger baseball. I'm 34 years old. The first half of my life, the Dodgers won 1 playoff series, or if I guess we count 2008, they won 2 playoffs or 2 playoffs, 1 playoff game, 1 playoff series, and then ever since then, it's been a little bit different. So.
Yeah. So yeah, closing thoughts on this. Everything that you can find pregame, postgame footage. Roger behind the scenes is working at Dodger Stadium. I'm sure he's celebrating with the team right now as we speak. We'll have all that footage up on the Bleed Los Podcast YouTube channel, so be sure to check it out. Anybody that wasn't able to join us here for the live version of this episode will be up on our YouTube channel as well for you to kind of look back on and celebrate with us. In past tense. And then DodgersBeat.com. That's where we have all our writings. I can already see Steve Webb, our editor, kind of typing away about all the news and stuff that we're getting from the series, interviews and written format, all that stuff as well. I'm sure we will be back in some capacity in between the 5-6 game layoff and then getting back to the pregame, postgame episodes for the World Series as well. And hopefully we're talking about a World Series championship in the near future. But Vince, definitely great to talk to you again. I'm sure we'll definitely do it again soon. But yeah, Dodgers are back in the World Series. I'm ready. I'm ready for it to begin. I can't wait for Friday.
Let's go. Let's do it.
Yeah. So that'll be it for this episode of the Bleed Los Podcast. We will see you on the next one. Be sure to like and subscribe to the channel and have a good one, and go Dodgers.